There we go. Great. Good morning, everyone. Oh, good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce Michaela Martinez, who is a new faculty member at Emory in the Department of Biology.
Samala gondro samde yes tanda ane na tanda Emory gi jingwi tsering din sengna la ya ane gigin saba Micaela tanda ane ngoto chia te gao chons.
And last week, Robin gave us a talk in which he talked about emotions and brain activity, but also mentioned a study in which they were also collecting measures of immunity.
That the Drongbu na again Robin like sula tande samyon ta ni lepagi chegu kola ya lepagi chegu de chele kola ya dus something trio reste mse ni shenda chikari kola chi lang yo res na nga su nengo grang shin chi ro ti kola dus chi lang yo res.
And when Ken talked last week about sleep and brain activity and dreaming, he also mentioned that sleep was very important for health.
Ta dentro ngome na la gen ken la ge ani karsa ani ta ani karsa de lepa ge chegu ti ko la ya concentrate kapsa ani nga sula kari ko concentrate re sena ani ani ti na chi ga nga so ge nengo ki rangshin yo ro nengo mala te la yang ke chambim bi person yo res.
And Micaela is an evolutionary biologist and ecologist who has thought a lot about sort of human immune responses.
Tanda get Micaela ta chambam bana so de penji rupa gi jingu penji rupa choro ti gang la ya ani subject chyo tanda te la nga so kar so re ta nga so ti yorwa nengo rangshin yorwa o ti ko la ya ni ya go chingres.
And is increasingly studying in innovative ways how to sort of measure immune responses over the course of seasons or when people have different sleep patterns.
That tanda imba na ro 20th junior pugirin la ra ani je ani kita che ni ge tu somando tan tina ro yo bi caps te tola tene de ani je nga chu nengo ke yalen ti kan ro chi chi ndu se ti ko la ya ani je paso ko da certo granjin dan bi shim bi bin na ngires.
So this evening, Micaela is going to present some of her research and how she does her research to really sort of give us a better understanding of how sleep, which you're all studying, impacts health.
That tiri gonda imbana ge Micaela ge murangi taksi simji chi nani ani anyi te latin de ti ro anyi latin de ti nga so ge nengo ki malala chorwa te la ya shuchingara ru chi tegi yo meti ko la ya ni ngoto na grace.
And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Micaela.
Thank you. I'm going to give you an introduction to Earth's geophysical cycles.
Tanda de la ti ngoto science nga so skola gi sankam ge gan la ya jungkro khashi chorwa te ko len de sijagens.
And Earth's geophysical cycles gives a time structure to our experience here on Earth. And all of you will be very familiar with many of these cycles. And what I'm showing across the bottom along this arrow are the different cycles listed. And I'll go over them one at a time.
Tanda de ro nga so ge skola ge ko ge sangkhong ko khode de la tene de ani nga so ge ji nyensen kan ro ji nyungu yo pa choro te ge ne ta de la ya shichen te ge res ro ta da de la ya ji khonre tong khorjen de la ya ani ko mando khashi ji yo res tanda wo la ya thi ji ten ko de ga la ya kare kare in ba ti de shi ja yo res te la ya tanda ne re che ne de shi ja ge yes.
So the shortest cycle is approximately 12 and a half hours. Oh, that was an accident. 12 and a half hours, and that's the tidal cycle, where in our oceans, we have the rising and falling of the tides every 12 and a half hours.
That andage nga chuge khorjing na ne khorjing thongshwe terwa khorjing thongshwe te kare resena ani tidal cycle de wati nga chuge dilab ge ta ko khorjing ter do dilab ko khorjing te ani ko the Jonathan Cheka Natali Chungres, or Dekares, and Angasogi, Jansugo Lapti, or Jansugo Lapti Yapeva on Dripigi and Kugo Projinches.
And the tidal cycle results from the gravitational effects of the moon orbiting the Earth.
That Antangatsugi, we love Ki Korjundirwa, we love Korjundiku, Karila Tenichunguresena, and a Sukola Gitalaya, and the Dawati Korajagor, what Dawati Korala Tendete, and Angatsu, we love Korjunchungores.
Next, we have the Dial cycle, and this is our daily 24-hour cycle, which results from the Earth spinning about its axis.
That Nodikalena, Dial cycles, what thing as it is Shigi, the Nisha Chiki conductor, Dikalana, Shigi, at the Cheti, Kaila Tenichungores, Stambalanga Suge, and a Sukolati, and a Rankorjagora, Konima Talaya. So
when you're standing in any one position on Earth and the Earth spins about its axis, that position will experience both light and darkness depending on the orientation to the sun.
Ko Sukola de Rankorjagro, Rankor the Chunish, the Shigirang, Rankor Chijago, on the Kola Digi Yopainaya, Kogis, Anikogi, Sukola, Nicola Yopaina, Kogis, Nimalaya, Carton, the Latin Dete, Natural Laya, Chunish, the Shigirang Laya, and the Carsigurata, Nimotan Samogi, Netanchorati, and the Yungres.
Now we also have lunar cycles, which also are an effect of the moon orbiting the Earth, but in this case, it has to do with we see the moon as going from a full moon to a very little moon being visible because of the position of the moon relative to the sun and the Earth. And this, so one last thing, and this happens about the course of 1 month.
The Shendeka system Dawatan Devi, or Dawatan Devi, Corjindi, Dawatan Devi, Corjindika Resena, the Yanko Dawagi, Dawag Coraja Contuga, Netantila Tenichon in Bacanshila, Code, Dawati, Sukola Laya, Aneko Karsugureta, Coraja Goro, Coraja Balatin, the Tengasuge, Dawagi Corjindi Jungo, rest that day, Jungo, but they. Nengasu Dawachi Chernab Sakura that Jungi Dawani Dawa Kekuchi Mejuga Tangasuga Dawa Series Sigurata, Dawa Mejuga, Teta, Ane Dawa Tomasigura, or Teta, or Teta rest, and the Yungu Yobatica rest, and Ane Karsugureta, Dawati, and Himalaya Kashok Tonton Latinate in the Chungores, Ane Degi Corjin de Laya, Nekasongo Gores, and you must Gores.
And then we have the annual cycles, and this is the 1 year long cycle of 365 days that results from the rotation of the Earth around the sun. And then the very longest cycles are the glacial cycles, which happen over 10,000 years or more and result from slight changes in the Earth's axis and its tilt.
Glacial cycles, glacial cycles, Chapatan Jongala, and Karsukorea. Jongala, low the Tonto in the Gogres. The United Carlana, the Sukola Nana Yopi Suge, Soxin Chihuahua, a Tiging wool and Juach Dugorwa, or Teletanichungres.
And so to give you an image of how our physical environment on Earth changes with these cycles, here are some images of the seasons, the tides, the day-night cycle, and the rainy season.
Tande talanga surwa ko karsugurita tandagi junkon de talatene de tanga sula kanado chungre system balaya nga su namti shi orwa namti shi opate ta ani tulabje ani jiga yang chartui orwa chartui ta tane shenda yang su nimmu dang sammugi netan chorwa te to yongores.
But the most important thing to note is that these cycles of our planet are the oldest features of our planet because they're driven by our solar system.
그 단단 데이터 게 니 과디카레 단단들 코르좀 망부치 못을 지송 데이터 참마다가 속에 스콜라기 가나 요페게 다 코가랑신 또 체취 인슈치게 바팅이 고요레 스타 데이터 디나도 임비게 jensen데 가르텐 칼레텐이 총레스나 니 데이터 단다 코르좀 가시지 못을 지송 데이터 참마데 니 니말라텐 데이터와 아니 가서 니마기 짐지요로 델라텐 데이터 좀 니말라텐이 좀 요레스.
So life on Earth has evolved under these contexts of having day and night, seasons, and tides.
that's kola tangi ne kotse sho chongya chigoro teyang tanda ani kojin data ko switching ola chong res pichashena nga sunam ti shiyo pare ni mutang samuyo pare te tabu geta ko ne kars dilabio pare data ke switching ola chong res.
And so my research focuses on how human health changes with these cycles.
다 ngarangi simji jiade kangi gala musigo sestambalaya ani kojin data larwa kojin data ke switching go ne nga soge ni chi thweten la switching kana ro chi tek du sa te ko la yasin ji yes.
And as I had mentioned, that these cycles have been very important for the evolution of organisms. And I wanted to give you examples of organisms where they have now faced extinction and mortality because of mismatches between their body and Earth cycles.
다 담보들라야 단다기 지금 코르진 데이터와 코르진 데이터 안에 그 징위기 벤질라 같이 개첨부 이면된 거는 시셔. 예스타 딜라텐데 데이터와 단다 아니 단 데이터 추발라텐데 데이터와 아니 그래서 그랬다 그 징위 데이터 징위 데이기 내사기 고유기다 가지고 코르진 데이터 그 바로 근데와 추발라텐데 데이터와 니 징위 가실라야 지금 그래서 그랬다 가시 만나 자동으로 당 가시 만나 지금 보시로 지금 내선 되게 중요해서.
The picture on the top is an Arctic seal pup. And this pup is freezing because mothers give birth to their pups in the springtime when historically there was snow. But now, because of climate change, snow melts earlier, and now there's no snow to keep the pups insulated for them to hide under in the springtime to stay warm.
단다게 갈라 요주티로 왔다가 속에 남다긴 주독라 남식인 주독라 테니 좀 같은 레스 인주도 가르나나 단다가 속에 다 장내게 도와라 야사체 토사 도와라로 아니 장사 도와라 아니 좀 위다 세일 되게 보고 지레스 와테 저게 임바나 고초다 지야티 같이 지레스네 지까지 그레스 지까지 위 값이 임바나 적당 되게 값이 임바나 아니 강잡거와 강잡을 테니 아니 고 가서 그래다 Pugichi cups Kanja Latenede, any Kanga Ola to Stambala, Chirgin Bana trade ochi the Giores, Tanda in Banacola, Karikanga Tekores, snatching out so that Tanshitagi, the Kangeti Tekores, Karchila Stambalaya, Nichi Chatuti Pava attended the county Shuji Chugiburo, the Latended, and the Chapachachi Tanshitagi, Neko Nyankati Juniores.
And another example is this Arctic hare at the bottom. And this rabbit species typically will change the color of its coat from brown to white. And it does this between it will transition its coat color between the summer and the winter to match the background. And so this rabbit has not yet turned brown, but the snow has melted early. And so now we have this mismatch where we have a white rabbit on a brown background because it has not been able to catch up to the changes in the seasons.
그 전에지가라나 그 channel 되니기 리본스 또 리본데 임바이나 저게나 거기 가서 그랬다 남티 땅때네 대탄 거기 분도대 천천주로 그래서 비차샤바이나 로다 군카 간자비 값이 임바이나 아니 분도대 카푸이체 아니 에어카 그 간테르 메피 값이 임바이나 아니 가서 그랬디 데 거기 부디로 아니 천타대 가서 묵고 문답 주고요레스 단단도 스타바 임바이나 되게 그런 거 거기 던 거기에 카톤이 잘 따바인바나 아니 디 탁탁 되게 미도 왔어 탁탁 되게 메뉴 진생까지 시스템 발라야 jirgita ekam takar ekam malheman malhengelaya ku kanti shiztam balaya ani kasugure ta jirgi imbana kang karpu nana santa karpu chena eka ko ge ta dinado imbi kapse imbana santa muputi yore standa dus ta ko kang shubala tene ko ngasa sala shu ani korang ge santa manjiru ngala ya ani netan dinado chi chayore dian ko ge ta chi mismatch sagoro ta koi ta ne ko ge netan te mathamba ge netan te chadeores.
So I show you these images to explain that most organisms, they organize their life around the seasons, winter, spring, summer, and fall, or the rainy or dry seasons. And they also organize their life around the day and the night.
Now, that and the do decision on Jensen kindness Tambalaya, and a chiga social data, social data, and a Kotsoge, Soache Tante, and a Kangileshi Shagres, Tambalanga, Suganam Tishi, or Yergun Tonchitan, and each Carsogreta, in sense, or Titala Shisha, the Tanswati, and each Alaya, Tachigiris.
And to give you another example, has to do with the day and the night. So we have organisms like fireflies and glowworms that produce light at night in order to communicate with other individuals of their species.
That young Shendachi Rishaba in Bana, Shendating in Latin Chungo Pati, and the Chikari system Balayang Atsugi, the Bumi Church or Rambugala Michurch Titan, Shenda Yanko. Tinda Shenda Yanchos or Kutakar system Balaya, Legonda de Kusu Zubugani Roa, Edo Chemchenra Chitila Tenede, Kusu Pansung Parolaya, and he could Chigadapats and Kurtonage Tapstango Reskusuge.
So they've organized their life around the day and the night, but because humans produce so much artificial light at night, this is contributing to driving many of these species to extinction.
That's Chirgi Mana Kosuga, Nin Kosugi, Chitsuati, Nin Tang Tsengi, Chiga Baro, Corgentilla to Shagayore, that Tisha Bagashila, and Kosugi, Carso, Chiga, that Tonlanchia, and Kosu Etilatin the Pancor, that you could Sigurwa. You might not so make it what the music lot your Eti, that Santa Gola, Shuchambuch, Stumbatilatin the day, and Kosugi Telaya, Chiga. Nintang Tseng Latin on Swaro, Swatila, Yashushente dete, and a Mampuchik in its Hunela, no Chambotegi, date and data wigi, and equal Stingy, Tan Social Kutsugi, Swala, Yashushente.
And so even though I'm very interested in wild animals, I'm also very interested in how these things affect humans, because humans also evolved under natural environments, being exposed to natural day and natural night and the seasons, but today we live in a very artificial environment.
Chirgin Bina, Tandagi ko Digar Subreta, Chirgin Bina, Tandagi Detala Tendeta, and so Rechig social Shigoro, Rechig social Kusula, Shichin, Conductor Patella to no use, in Banata de Galaya, and it's in Detala Tendeti, what the Junkor Detala Tendeting, and so draw Milaya. And if you can take those Telaya pay to no chambers, the Karchin lava in Bina, and it's still game by now, and so made it Swaroya Laya, Ranshung, Kroichko, Ola, Roya Tapshi, Jetan, Telaya Gauchuris, in by Nayan Tanda, in by now, also Chitswaroya, Tantitsama, Kanadochi Chagores, Stambalayata, artificial system, Yana Mizu, by Yana Chumasagota, Ranshung, my big Kroichko, Ola, Yanga Sushicham would do Stinigioris.
And so now I'll go over some aspects of human health where we have signals that the seasons are very important and the day and the night cycles are very important.
Tandanga su karichi motochigi in Sestambalaya, and a Ninsengu Condritan, and a Namtishu Condrite, Latin de Tirwa, Tangatsu is Punana, your big Dutch Lorwa, or Teta Karikarichi, Yopatan, and then Namti Ninsengu Condri data, the Pugada, Kangakachila Kitchen women to Poland against.
Great. Just one second. I wanted to skip through some slides really quick. Okay, so first I want to talk about infectious diseases.
다 담보텔라 nga suge te gwene de kolande sijakins.
So here I'm going to go through 3 graphs of human infectious diseases. One of them is measles, one of them is polio, and one of them is influenza.
Nahota tanda de nga su ro mi ge ko la chonwe ge de neti karsukreta neti mandawa sum kolande sijakins ta tampote measles jinyo de polio res simbate de influenza res.
Okay. And so we will look first at the graph on the top left, and along the graph, what we're seeing are all of these big spikes. Each of these spikes is an outbreak of measles in the springtime in the United States.
Tanda de remu tampote la ta ba imbana remu tampote ge gangang la yo sade ka resana de kaps ko chi nga su ta de thiri chi do ga thiri de kaps ko se nombo de la do ga data carriers tambalaya ne ko ani measles ti chap chambu shu chambu chaba den gwene ti shu chambu chaba ge ne tan sango yore deya chika ge ti sro chika ge ti su cha chambu chambu kanshla deya chwa te arena chonjures.
And these data, these outbreaks are historical from the 1900s before we had the vaccine for measles.
Ta data imbana ro nga su da logic na ne ko chap chambu shu chambu da logic ranshin damba ge ne tan ten cha res ro ta te chulu chi tong guja buchu gi ta ko tang na ro do ko tang la this to show ro do te ani ka su re da nga su ge ta measles la ya te government yo ro government te zuma tu ko ngwa la ya ni cha chambu chong gi ani ko ne tan cha yo res.
Now the next plot in the middle is showing spikes for polio that happened every summer in the United States before we had a vaccine against polio.
Nipa de ro rmo nipa de gala kare tan yo res stambala ya ne ga su polio ge vaccine chi ro polio ge ne ti karsa government ti martin bi ngwe la ya ani yerka ge ti su ani polio ti shu chambo chap bi ge ro yerka ge ti su ani ku shu chambo chap bi ge ani ko thir ji res.
And then on the bottom is showing flu, and for influenza, the spikes and the outbreaks always come in the winter.
Da thamag o de la karten go res stamba nga su chamrim chi go chamba garim cham chamrim se gro da ko shu chambo chamni de yang ko gungkha ge ti su ro gungkha ge ti su shu chambo cha go ba ge ani ko tang thu tamba chinis.
And I've looked at every human infectious disease, and every disease has its own unique time of year when it occurs.
Tang arang ba na do mi gi la chong bi gi ani nasa ko la do sita ba in stai tambala ya ani nasa mando la ya ani ko kas ko da lo chi ki namti mando wa chong gi ani ko chi chechu muksa wa tin da chi dus.
So just like looking at a calendar, you can see which time of year people will get sick from each individual infectious disease.
Tang aso ge chi loto la ta yo pa nansing ge wa loto la ta yo pa nansing ge ai dus ta ba ina nga so ge mi la ya kar so da lo chi ki ti cho nam sila nam ta nga so ge nam ti ka gi chi ka sa na sa kan gi chi na sa kan gi chi ta che ta pa kan gi chi na sa re se te nga so tat kres.
But the same thing happens for other aspects of our life in terms of when we have high rates of death and also when we have more births.
Ti nansing ge ne nga so ge chi chua ge ani ko ge chi cha che ma so na tap cha shen da yang to sta na ko res wa pi cha sha ba ina ani ka tu nga chu la ya ani kar so re da chi chua ge chi chun chi ro zhong ru ya ge de shu chen bo yo pa tang ka tu ani chi pu gi chi ya ge chi che chi ro ti ma yo pa de ya to start ba chi res.
So now I'll show you data for deaths, and all of these blue plots, so we have 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 plots in blue showing the spikes. These are wintertime spikes in deaths that are caused by biological causes.
Ta tanda ba na de la ya tambo de la ya thyo ngom bu na tam bi ji ru ma so chi ni sum shi chi do ga de da ani ani nga su kar sa gung kha ge ti ro ani chi ga de la ten de ta nga su ge 지금 랑숑 거 쓰고라다 링컴기 트레팅기 랑전 라텐데데 아니 고 지 종위기 네탕 지레스 미 종주기 네탕 지고와 어때레스.
And these biological causes include stroke, heart attack, Alzheimer's disease, and respiratory disease.
단단하게 단 데이터 가리가리 시스템 발라 싱가 수가 영상가 데도가 싱가 수가 레파기나 데리 창가 데도가 선바데 아자임 데 챈다데 Alzheimer's disease 데 제 챈다데 바랑가 수가 지 데이터가 우중의 단대위기 나살라테니 정아레스.
So it's important to note that for causes of death that have to do with human biology, there also is a time of year.
데 다야 징가 수가 가리 하고고 개첨벌의 시스템 발라야 나츠기 룸캄라 테니 데이터 양 지 추춘 중앙지와 대양 코게 남티 만다고 값스 중고 요파티 양이고 하고고 개첨부 작도스.
In contrast, when we look at deaths that are caused by accidents that have nothing to do with biology, there is not a time of year. The spikes are random.
That 데이터가 지금 양 드라이팅 수 셴다 단단가 수가 쟁행 퍼체스로 왔다 차고 된다고 올라텐데 데이터 아니 아니 미 종야기 때기 그거 세들라다 바인바나 거기에 될라야 아니 가서 그래다 지금 망보 종았던 용종 종하게 내탕될라야 아니 그 남티탄 대화메 바로 그 지금 니메그랑서 그러다 만족 영화 지금 일단 작도스.
And similarly, this happens when we look at births. And if we look at this plot, this is births going for every single month from 1930 until 2014 in New York in the United States.
단단히 가르스나 아니 뉴욕에 나디가 나라와 아니 치통고잘 숨진이 치통잘 시주발라 다와 레레레레 나텔레 부기치위기 차치거와 어때 두스가서 들고 같이 옌스.
And if you look at this plot, you'll see all these teeny tiny spikes that happen all along the plot. And each of those teeny tiny spikes, like a heartbeat, is an increase in the number of babies born. And this increase typically comes between the spring and summer months.
단단 데이터스로와 제속에다 데이터 스파이크 시스템 바이어 퍼와지어와 고거 스티지어와 세탄다 데이터가 가서 랍디게 셀라타 바이마이나 코 지스 레레레레레 데이터가 스tambalaya 포기 지비게 세티 마와 정화요라 퍼와디 성고요레스타 데야 포기 지비게 세티 퍼와디 아니 지금 같이 정요레스 스tambalaya 아니 지카타 야카가 바로라 정샤스.
So when we think about all of these things together, humans have a time of year when we get sick from different infections. We have times of year when we're more likely to die. And we have times of year when we're more likely to give birth.
그게 세치거와 어디까지 모안종 그래서 데이터 양고 남티 지금 님의 마인 바로 남티 지금 값을 진종 종하게 스차치 뭔가 요빠게 다든가 숨도스 통도스.
And this is very similar to wild species that reproduce at a particular time of year or may migrate or may hibernate.
단 디간게다 송그레스 스tambalaya nga수가 리치기 소셜 요르와 리치 소셜 그 남티 강론치라야 부기치야도 다 남티 강론치라야 아니 사체칭네 사체 젠달라니 코리아다 아니 그 남티 강론치라야 구수베드 지구 요르와 고다 각신 반나 하이브리네트 스tambalaya 베팅 구초메 바크로 그 수수 공부는 주지 주노보다 같이 분위기 삼치드나 요르와 어때다도 데이터라 땡기 요레스.
So then this leaves the question, do humans have seasonal changes in our bodies that we have yet to recognize and study from biology?
단 내가 간술로 드어가리 중그레스 스tambalaya tanda partang chingatsun ruwa migi lunkam ga nanglaya namtigin jurdok tang thumbigi ani jurwa chirwa tetala shi shaba ani ngatsu tanda part ani chiga karsugure yang takshe ta simjikji manyo agi ngatsu zupugi link nibab do tinda do yorwe se trawatel ilak yores.
So the question is, are we similar to other species?
That was in the decorations, otherwise.
So this graph looks a little bit complicated, but I'm going to explain it. Across the bottom is showing the months of the year from January until December.
The wall I am to take Galaya, and a Lucian Yopi, Dawa, Johnny, the Dawa, Tampone, Dawa, Junior, but did some yes.
And then across the y-axis is showing how long the day is, how many hours of light we have each day.
That thing got to Jean like I shared Balaya, Nimachikanalaya, and a Chingatsu, Nimashira, Kersayas, what a Nimashiri gay Titsukatsu, but it's yes.
And then each individual curve is showing a different latitude on Earth.
The Karsati Tadela could 2 manda chigua, 2 manda, they think as Sukola Ganlaya and Teti or Tetu, Sukola could check what you do, say, or Tigi, any could get Setikarim at the Tanguris.
So if you live at the equator, which is the 0 line, then there's 12 hours of daylight all year around, which is why this line is flat.
That under the Keti Choranga, so Sukola get Chitisura, Sukola get that Chimaga Chititan Tanyo Paimbaina, and a Lukanza Laya, and in Samti, Nimutan Senti Tinyambarwa, and a Nimate, Lukanza Laya, and a Karsure. Kersayo pig, Yamashir with the John your residence, Tambalaya, and then the Kansugi, the Lekor inside they get Shaja correct a tongue pitch like what.
So if you live far away from the equator, for example, at the line where it's 50 degrees north or south, what happens is in the winter time, the length of day is very short. So here, if we start here in January, 8 hours of day.
That under picture Shabana Nachu such or Nachu any Tetiki degree that could society or Tetik Seti Nachtamba in being Delataba in Bina, and you could Dikalana Natsugita Sukola Hotan Chankarina and Kordaya, the Tetiti, or Ting Nachutela in Bina, and then also Chicaro, that's the Tampu Capsum Guzu Capsu, and you could Nimagi to Yamashare the Sotit and the Genus.
And then if you go to the summer months, the day length increases. And in this example, it moves to 16 hours of daylight. And so most of us here have experienced this longer daylight in the summer and shorter daylight in the winter. But the reason I put the picture of the birds migrating in the background of this graph
because the bird taking on like Nico Tichi Shadow, Ne Cha Mambochuko, and Nipuyagi Parchishadwa, De Shano Junsenkari in Lavina
is because it is the change in the length of day that birds use to allow them to tell them when to prepare to migrate.
That Jakusulaya Chitanga Niponia Chakusula Tavaina, and Kusulaya Chiga Nipoyaga Sinsha, Tandurensha said, Karila tended to Kutsuhaku Yoresena, and in Yumugi, Tisugaran Sechora, or Tilatani Haku Yores.
And the same thing, the change in day length is also what organisms use to determine when to prepare to reproduce and when to change their coat color.
现在yang azu nyimu gitu cuy gerang se chigorwa detola tene deti ane yang ko ching socha karsa socha shenda kashige ane karsa korida azu jiga bugi chia chigora bugi katu chigote thachya rawata ane susuga yang jiga bugi kandon jwa ta chigora jwa katin rugo yorese oteta ane thachya bala ya peche tangi yores.
So we want to know whether or not the human body also uses the change in the day length to make changes within our bodies.
Ta tanda nga tsuge yang kari hakuni tugu yores stambala nga tsuge mi imbai na yang jiga nimu ge ninseng ge jiga rengse tela tene dete nga tsuge zupuna la yang jwa tanga yore yo mare sete ne hakuni tugu yes.
And so it is a little bit complicated, but what we're doing is trying to understand if the change in the day and the night through the seasons gives us changes in the seasons internally to our bodies.
Tadi chitang tes ngonya po yores imana nga sugarwa chi nintang chan la tene deti nintang chan yana nga suga chi namchi la chi ti to kanjwa la tene deti na nga su zuku na la ya ko ti to tempi kanjwa chi tang do mu do sa ti netis karsugre nyota chao yore imana ti to hakwa la ya tapchi ching yes.
And now I would like to take any questions and also ask, what would you predict? Do you predict that we would have changes in our body that happen with the seasons?
Tanda imana ani chetsuna la chi draw yo pa yuna yang draw ta ro chis ani te ta shola pha draw chi ta yes chetsu gongsu imana karisang go do swa ani nga chu namti ta chi nyinseng ge draw de la te de te nga chu zupuna la ya chi draw do ta tra do ye chre ye chi mare sang do sti tela yang chi gongsu do kar yes.
예시죠. 다시들래. 단다디 남조 남두 교와 도와라 땐지 같이 갈수 보자 남조 코육도 교와 도와라.
네네.
코육디 교와 도대 잠발라 당한주 중화요라 중화시.
네네.
사주 매롱디수 교와 도와라.
네네.
사주 매롱 교와 도와라 땐지 아니 가스고래 당한쪽이 수부랑신이 꼭 교와 도셔버려. 만족이 수부랑신이 가스고래 사주 매롱 딘솔고 땡고라.
네.
땡고도 삼발고 땡데 교와도 삼발 당한쪽 땡바데 고랑신이 교와 도셔기도 봐.
네.
어디네 주에.
That's all. He said there is change because when the seasons change, we see the environment where we live in changes, and because of that, our physical body depend on 5 elements: that fire, earth, wind, and etc. So, because our body depend on those elements or this environment in which we live, so when the environment or the best that our physical body depend on changes, of course our body also physically there is change inside.
Thank you. And this is why I was very excited to give this talk to all of you, because there's quite a lot of traditional knowledge when it comes to seasonal changes in the human body, but it is something that Western science has not caught up with yet.
That data tanda kita chilen so de yawo chongson ta reswa de intarwa tanda chitsula ane chi thonchen di ko la thela ya chi yang ko gau ta tu tang chi bat ne yins chi ka reses tambala nga su ge chi sujing ge rishon mampo chi kana la ya ane chi koiki injura tang namti injura la tene de tenchi ni ko zupu tang te la jura dugu yue me tang tigin drewa ko la ya ni rugjon chupu chi yo reswa imba na yang tang da chi ga yang ne chok ki chen ri tang sin ju pi ge nang la ya de ta la yang tang gong imba na ko tu nang ma tre pa tang ya na yang ko ge chi niwa ma ni pa ge ne tang ti cha yo res.
Were there any other questions for a moment?
Rajamba ayo sa
nga toyo
that's all.
tene tanda di sambuling di karisana rangor ge ta tene dawa khora rangor ta shengor ge che tene
Yeah.
ani nima khora ani karisana tanda zambuling ge ani rangor ge ta ya zambuling khora nima la khora ge onda shengor ge onda sambala khora ge ta di nganzo namgi nganzo gomba la mazo khora ge ta sami e khora ge do do yongor ge jora
Yeah.
tende ge ani tanga tangbo de kare tiwa de kare sene e ne korne da dus e kor do dus ke gu yorwes ta tindi e kor ge da yongor ge di nima khora rangor ge di la tu gu yor mares didos
Nga ti kare ala yekor ta yonkor sa ti chorong dit se ge yo akar sa
namgi ane gomba la kora gyapte zambala pena dugang daw de nima daw la chatne ane
Yeah.
zambuling ti ane ko dus ne kora gyaptan chiro rangor ge di korang dus shengor ge on de zambala nima la kora ge on de zambala shengor ge ro kora gyapte zambala ye le korne dus ke ro khandi res te ane nima la tu gu mares ta kora gyaptan
Alright. His question is about like rotation and the revolution of the Earth. We know that the Earth rotate around axis for the like in 24 hours, and it revolve around the sun like in 365 days. His question is like the rotational direction of the Earth, does that spin in a clockwise or anti-clockwise? Also, the direction in which it revolves around the sun, does that depend on the rotational direction of the sun or not?
I actually don't know the answer to either of those two things. But that is a very good question, and I will look it up. Were there any other questions at the moment?
Yeah, we have one more.
Oh, let's one more question.
Okay.
Ini tanda di misi di drama, tanda di nima ki trade lagi di sambala tanda niendang singda, ani tanda anso di tisi ki jawan dona tanda di anso le ceban dore ndo marisej da. Tiga orang harus samsen da karcun sena. Anso ceto tanda zuboya soala. Ani such a mingnu se sambala mego yora mego di trego yores tapi chasana ani ansol goa nasi ini kingi kandaw je na ya pol trego di sambala ani senang go tre tigisi male bache ani nyimi go tre mombole tigi ani nyendan senila supola yan soil chebashi chimodo yosres te nasi ani dishela ya ani dir chebado yora ani yakanda utne treshi chimolegra Ini kalau cetis meje tinggi jene, ani tinggi kan rauji naya, ya ko sano jual lah, coba sih cuma dosares.
He doesn't have any question, but he want to answer the question that you put on. His answer is because we like us, humans or other animals depend on their lives on the 5 elements, especially the fire to develop for development. Also, we consider fire means like heat or warmth. For instance, for human beings, he thinks because like daytime we have the sun and the temperature is high at night, when the sun is not there, the temperature is low. I think the human development also varies, like during the daytime when there's so much like a high temperature, or the night. Also, like the seasonal changes during the summer, we have like high temperature, or and it's mostly favorable for the plants or other animals to grow or develop. And during the winter, there's not much like warm or heat. It's not that favorable for their development. So he thinks the day and night, and also the seasonal changes like the summer and the winter, because of the element that is the fire or the heat, it also definitely affects the development of the organisms in the environment.
Well, I think that you're very likely right about all of that. And this is why we're trying to take measurements of the human body around in the morning and the evening and all throughout the day and every time of year, to see if we can measure the changes on the human body that occur through the seasons.
Tandage ani gelage sonju ge lenti sama ani ngarang samsing bana pe takto degi du sangbu du swa ni dela teni deti ani nga chuge ta chen ke takshe na khari chi go re system bala ya ani chi nin chen gi ti somando mando ta teni senta nga chu nam ti shi yor wa ta yergun tun shi gi ti somando kapsa ani mi gi zupu na ni ta chi chen je yo ju tin do chen je de ta ni chi ni ta te kan do chi chag du se ti ko la ya to shi chi go res.
But most important, what we want to know is if changes in the body that occur on the day and the night or the seasons, if they will happen even if we keep people in a very constant environment.
Ta chikare system nga su tono chiku sitakare system bala nga su namjin bana chi ta ninsen ta yergungi tisumando ka su zupu na telin juran duwa chigorwa juran duya gin juro teta ani getting asu me chi ani ko jura me pi kori chi la ya ani chi ka su kori tembu gran jin chi la ya sha pa bana jura te ton duguran du mare se te gan la ya to chi gores.
Because what has been learned from the study of birds and plants and also many other wild species is if you keep them in captivity or inside, their body will still go through those changes with the seasons.
Nga chu ga rechi ge so cha ta chi cha ta chu ko la ya a chi ka sa ga nga chu nam ti jura ta ne de ta zu punan juan do ge ne ta chi wa o te ta la ya ani ko namjin bana rang shung ko yo stam da du go wa imba na ya nga chu che la da kar su ga ta ko chu ta nyer go wa ta nyer de ta nga chu chen zi kan da la nyer wa chi go wa da ne do chi to se che ba imba na ya sa cha chi la ko chi la sha go yor da ina ko chu ge zu pun nge jirwa chi du ya chi go wa ti yang wa ma na shi juan do dus.
So even if a bird does not see the sun, its body will still prepare for migration. And this is because they have a clock that is inside their body to tell them what time it is.
Ta chi 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 ba na ko ni ma ti thong me ba na ya chi zu pu ngo ni chi yang ko chi ka sa ba ta ne po chi la ta dik chi ga ran shin te yong go yo re so de chi yong go no jin sen de ka re se na ko ni ma ta thong yo ma da ina chung go yo re ti ta chung go jin sen ka le na ko su li bo na la ya nga su ga ta tin zum kho lu su ko da o tin da chi go re sta ti la tin de tan ko su ge chi ga ta nam ti ga ka ti chi le du se ti la tan ni ha ko yo re.
And in animals, this clock has been found to be a set of genes that turn off and on depending on what time it is.
Ta nga chun ro mi la chun ba na ro ane de nga chu ge zu pu ge ri ji yo ra ri ji gi na la yo pa ti ha ku yo re sta ti na ri ji na ne ko ka su re ta chi ri ji ti se ma se ge ni ta chi ki ga ne tin de shi jang go res.
So what we've done is we have 18 people who we bring into these bedrooms that we have in a lab. And while they're there, they will sleep. And then when they wake up, they do normal activities. And we take blood samples from them every single hour.
다 ngaso de la ya mi chojistro ani ko karso greta dus takshe kana len de da ne ko so ani ku chi sege chi da kar sege chi senu ge la ya ani namjing gi chegu de chi chi ge yores ro ani te ge la ya ko so chi so re jam ta ne ko so ga tra len de da tra kana la ya dus kare kare chi tu se de la takshe chi yes.
And we've brought them into the lab every part of the year. So the winter solstice, the spring equinox, the summer solstice, and the autumn equinox.
다 데가사 kuchu tashe khana chu kuchu ketang kapsa nga chu ta ti do ka sa nga chu ge ye ni do ta gun ni to yo ta ni gi su de che ani chi yang nga chu chi ka ta teng ka la ya jinyan jinyam ta ta nyam se ko ta nyin se nyam ya gi tu chu wa o te ta kapsa ni do ka su ge chu kuchu ketang de de ni tashe chi yes.
And what we are studying are their hormones, their immune system, their metabolism, and their sleep.
Tati kaso kuso kare kare la tosi chi ore system bala is kuno na yo piga menze chi etne ngasu karso koreta chinengo ka yalen chi etne zupu na ne sin jua chi ora sin jua gran shin te chi etne ni te tala ya tosi chi yes.
And I just wanted to ask Nicole, do I have an extra 5 minutes? Can I go over at least one plot?
Oh yeah, we actually have till 10:30, so there's plenty of time.
Okay, good. So what I'm going to show you is how one hormone changes between the day and the night.
Ta ta nga kare pressure jagin system bala nga so nyin tang chang gi chinjro te la tene de ta zo po na la ya ane ko menzi chi jwa dwa chi ro o te gi ani menzi chi ko la de she jagin.
So this hormone is called melatonin, and it's a nighttime hormone.
Hanta de la melatonin sa ba che ro ti kala na chamu gi su che tin chi gi ani de menzi chi ko yores.
So this plot that I'm showing you is covering 3 days. It's 3 days going across.
Hanta tanda de la ya jitan do thiri jitan do de kala na nin sim gi ro ni ma sim gi tu che la cha pi gi ni thiri jins.
And the y-axis is the amount of melatonin that we measure in a person's blood.
Ta tanda de kala ko jong tu ga la yo chi yo ro jong tu ga la yo de ka re se na ani mi tan zo shi chi ni ge thak na la yo chu gi ani melatonin ka su chi che tin chi sha sa de yes.
And each different colored curve is a different person.
Ta tanda de la ya ko ti to ka sa theory gi chancha manda do theory chancha manda yo ba te ka re system bala ya zo shi chi manda ba chu yes.
And what I want you to notice are these 3 big spikes.
Ta che chu gi to na chi go sa de la ya ko ge se se gro ta lab pro ta ba na de ge se de tubo ka shi to de ta le to na chi ro chi.
Each of those spikes is showing melatonin being produced at night in these people's bodies.
Ta de ge ko ge se no mo yo pa de ta kar song go re system bala ya ani me zu shi chi ni ko so ge zu po na la ya ani chamu gi ti melatonin ka so che tin chi yo pa de chong yes.
So we can measure this hormone here. This is in the summer, but I also have data for the winter, spring, and autumn.
Ta tanda de kala na ko ga yer ka gi ti swa jiwa che ani chenda yan tanda ga tang thu se ko ro te ani chi gung kha tang chi ka tang tong ka la chong ju ga tang thu tiang yes.
So we can measure how does our nighttime hormones change from season to season.
Ta nga su kare tanda digre se na nga su ge chi namti manda we kaps ani chamu chong ai gi ani chi ga ti chi ro menzi chi ro de chetin chi ga se ka so chi ri do te nga su ga tanda digre chapter kare do te tanda digre.
And it gets a little bit complicated, but what we see are changes in our nighttime hormone that follow the sunrise.
Ta this nyokra so yo res ro imba na ta nga su ge zupuna na chetin chi wa ge chi menzi de la ya ani chi kar so re ta nima she no ge la yan jro kana do chi do te ta gins.
Because when the sun rises earlier, then we need to stop making our nighttime hormone earlier.
The Keti Yamati Chayatis and Auchomba, Yama, the Nasani Charba in Bana, Nangasu Zupu Nangi, Mundagoyagi, Menzi Chetinchua, and Assassinate San Jago.
Are there any questions?
Draw ayos.
I have a question for you, Micaela. So here you see some people are making a lot more melatonin than others. Does that correlate with how much they slept or how much they moved while they slept or anything about their sleep?
Tanda dirwa, Chetu do still on la taba in bina, electrical and Tirgan taba in bina, Kashi chiki and the melatonin gate, Menziti pay, Mambu chetin chidua, Kashi non chetin chidua. That Gelatrogar system Balaco get chetin to a second Dramada Yobate, and it made the Nebi caps, and a Koranga, Nebi caps, Nigi Chiran Sedota, Nigi Yalodota, and Eco the Latin de Yanchi, Matsu de la Persa. Nilatin Sankam Layanko, Switching Trigger or they talk a parola, did you did correlations of what to your maris.
Sleep can affect your hormone melatonin because if you wake up at night and your eyes see light, your body will stop making melatonin.
Nilatin de thing as so and is Kulaya, switching trigger, Ganlaya, Carsabreta, Nickel, Niva Latin data, and is Kula, Tegre, Tenemitse, and Eco Tandagia, Menzi, Melatonin, Chetincho, Samsharatina, Pisha Shabana, should send the corn, Senko, and you sell Pina. You said, and you said, look at Jella making us to earth tona, young as with Punaneco, melatonin game, Menzi, and Chetincho, Samshagres.
But we told all the people in our study to stay asleep all night.
Not so good Tashiga Capsa by Insena, and it you get on the Sichin Samalaya, Sandagon Kanzalaya, and you could erochis in the Shijayas.
So the differences you see are natural differences from person to person. Some people make more and some people make less. And it's healthy people can make all different levels.
Then the carrier system belongs to the melatonin, it's a masona could chapters you to one, the Shichin Sama Parola. That day, you particular system balaya, and you coach me mandola yakota, ranching is brother, ranching me mandola, me mando, and melatonin set the mando chetin resting galaya, and Sabatunga so me dim by Nakasa, me zupo de dentine by Narwa, dentine you mean by na. Me mando parolaya question check set the mando yores.
Were there any other questions?
To Ajamba Ayos.
We do the tapage melatonin Dandigi to Simon Caloca to Cycle. To the Guardians and the dinging again, song did return to a Casa Simjin Kashi and Cas. Ane tugi gyudola tene ta kogi sotap dang dila ane namdugi gyudola tene ta gyuado borse me sura ta ane ngajo lungba la de simji ta ni do jido sila ngajo chiwa lai ro ta pekena na de karsa logo chungi na chiwa lai chiwa diro ane chik de chiwa sijima chiwa lai de gunga la di je je judo je Sana Zuda, Tondre. And then Chick de la Dilega, Dom yo. Or Dingy, and then Gunga Chai on the Sumta, Gunga Chai on the Gunga, Gocho on the Sumpet, and Chihuahua not a sa, Prangi and Zuda as well. And then somebody not a Mazu and Mundura. Or Dinde do Nido, that Dinzu doji not a Karsa. And the cups of Candid Sower is raw, this is raw. And Pena Simjan Dindigi read out in another Lumba, that so Lumba and the Nil Kion, the Chensing and the Nilla Shane, this Shabaina, that Dugi and Karsa Gudo, Namdugi Gurdo, and Karsa and a Kurgun and a Konsogi Sotabla Shugin Tutu Tomares, Jodi.
Not a Tom Karichik remember?
La Tom de na Gunga ko disado. ane laudo do
ore
ni ko wa do de ni konzo kasa ngazo longba midin cha la da wa no konzo bet bet temba ge do wa da
ore yeah jiwa sa de karse go na ta inchikela chara kala guna ha ko sa
sadune nalo zuru da
te ha ko sa te la ya inchikela kala gore
la
inchikela kala gore inke kala mare jiwa
hibernation sig like
hibernation da ro samchen digmila that is this
sure yen de rogen
lasso lasso yeah and in like not related to melatonin but depend on the wild animals lively style depend on the seasonal changes so his question is like two part for the question. One is in his place like high up in the Himalayan kingdoms there are two animals. One we call jiwa that I don't know how that's called, but that animal during the winter time it goes into the hall or their home and stay there for like hibernate for all winter. And another one is they have a type of bear in the high mountains. They just disappear during the winter. What they say is they are just in the local language they call there's a fainted or just unconscious during the winter or something like that, but it's actually hibernating. So his question is during those times how those animals survive or like how do they live? And the other part of the question is when you bring those kind of animals to a zoo or like a compounded environment, how do they cope or how do their lifestyle changes according to that like artificial environment?
Yes. So for hibernating animals, especially bears and other hibernating mammals, what they do to survive is they generally, to anticipate going into hibernation, they pack on a lot of fat. And it's a very particular type of fat called brown fat that they can actually burn to keep their bodies alive, keep them warm enough during the winter hibernation.
That deer sakarsa ani chitangi bananga sugata ti kasugreta nasuga samchen ro tiganane ta samchi shenda do kuso dinaro jinyo ro ta jiga gungkha nyi gi samchin kachi ro kuso imbana chitang kari chigre system da gungkha leon stambal zku ge ta kuso ranjang ne ta gungkha ti nye chi ro ta ngasu nye de chi ro ta hotela ya zku ga ne ta tela ya kasugreta 지금 리와도티 용구 요팔라야 쿠스 주포간에 타디치그레스 타 타디치와데 카나도 타디치그레스 스탐발라에 주포간라야 칠리사그레스 칠루와 칠루데 미나야 브라운 팻 렉 도다 칠리타 카스그레 무쿠스고네 나타 오틴다 도치 사그레스 타 티스 주포간나 사바텔레 텐데 티타 칠라 카르치오레스 스탐발라야 네 코츠타 치 수수고 동난주 사동난주 예비 값에 네 칠루티 슈치데 티나네 네 수수로 고에기
So this is why you see those animals get very fat in the autumn, because they're storing and saving all of the nutrients that they can in order to keep their bodies alive as they sleep during the winter.
잡아치고요. 전부 차고요. 근데 아니 지수가 돈을 좀 그랬다. 가르치고 그랬을 담발아야 고소 구역이 시주대 아니 지루로 와다. 지루가 뭐라야 수포간도 사고요. 그랬어.
And it is very interesting what happens to those animals when they go into captivity.
다 고수인 바이나 가서 갈때 첸지 칸라고 당 이나 고가 당녀치기 값인 바이나 종이 값인 바이나 아니 고 수포간들이 지금 종아치고 왔대. 양천부 요레스.
Because if you give them food in the winter time, then they won't go into hibernation. They will stay awake.
다 게티 체는 그 고소라야 군카게 티스와 군카게 티스 아니 고 사마테바 임바이나 아니 고소 단다기다 지금 니니에 치워라다고 어때 지금 말이스 아니 고소 지금 셀리데그레스.
But their body will still undergo changes through the seasons, even when they're in captivity.
다 고소 때나도 지금 니얼지 고다 진짜 칸도 지금 여바 임바이나야 고소 그 zupugi nanglayan jurandugares na jurandugares.
And the same with birds. If you keep a bird in captivity, it will be very restless, wanting to migrate, even though it cannot.
Ta kete yang cha tinda ro cha ta ju tinda do tinda nyar bai bai na chitang ba no ko ta chi nepo chia ga ti se ti hai bai bai na ta pert ku yo maro ta nyar sa yo ro ko ge ja ge ni ga na chu sha yo ro in bai na ti ka su be de ko de zo ma thu pa ro tele so cha chi de zo ma thu pa ge ne tang te ku su ge cha chi tinda tengres.
So my hypothesis is that humans are like bears in the zoo. We experience an artificial world, so our bodies do not undergo drastic change in seasons.
다 나랑 그 최샤테 카레인 시스템 발라이 나랑 그 최샤테 같은 로미기 소 제단 치고로 때다 지 가서 그랬다 지다 지 젠지 칸다고 당 지나 지샤주게 다 덤도 당 샘친도 된다고 지그래 상구도 스러와 같이라 바나 가속게 지가 소아로 당 때다 지가 랑송 많이 바로다 주마게 스고로 다 미주고 거이치라 아니 예자 하는 가서 주고나라야 지금 지로한테 슈첨부 진로 마트한테 당 정도스.
It sounds like we have many questions, so we'll just spend the rest of the time going over questions.
Okay, sure. Tadanga sulaya drama boya sare tin stambalaya ani tandage chotang hama data kapsa ne draw challenge is. Right draw naroche.
Hello. Tangi chigo di tagi game Nicole.
Inkela son gisla.
So my question is related to the answer that you gave to Dr. Nichols' question. So since you said that when the person see the light, the production of the melatonin will be stopped. So my question is, is there a different process for the people who can't sense light, like those who are blind?
This is a very wonderful, insightful question, because the blindness is related to human sight and our vision system, but melatonin production is tied to a different system that we have in our eyes. There are two parts to the eye systems.
mi longba imbaina ta we thung marwa tige nikaptela kana no chungre system la ya twat yapu shuch tu sta melatonin chetan chiwate nga chu we se yorwa ta nga chu ge ani we thong ma thong se tige netan te kapsa ani rwa ani nga chu ta visual system al thong cho go mala chu ro thong cho mala de deshe jayong go reswa tanda melatonin se di chetan chi ma chi se de chetan imana ko mala ni chila ra legi yores ko ga netan te rwa 니치라 라리 고레스탄 nga suge chi 통솔고 말라서 지거와 통솔고 말라대요 거게 지금 주 통솔와 정화 지거와 왜 통화 정화 지거와 대요 거게 지금 말라가 아니게 지금 말라서는 그래 네 거게 지르 마서나 아니라야 땡기요레스.
Red light and green light is used for human vision.
다 왜인바나 nga suge 왜 말부터 정크티 인바나 가지고 미기 지금 통해 지거와 미기 통해 뒤쳐도 배시던 거레스.
But we have special neurons in our eyes that sense blue light.
tanga suge migi nangla ya ni we ngembu thongya ge yang ko ti karsa gare da wansa masuna wansa ti mxe ba yores.
And it is that blue light that controls our body clock.
Ta we ngembu de nga su su punana yo pe tinjung kholo ti tangzi jires.
So there are people who are blind, but they have a perfect body clock.
Mi la ya ro mi na ne ko mi longba cha ban da mi ki thong me ba shara tin do cha ba yo ban ban na ko ge zu ku na la ya tinjung ko kholo ti be da da yo ni yores.
And this is how we've come to understand that body clocks exist as their own separate entity.
Dila tene de nga su zu puna na yo pe tinjung kholo chora tinjung kholo te yang ko chi rang cha thi gang de wa chi ngu chi la ni yo pa nga su to yo res.
Hello.
Oh,
So my question is, does taking long flight affect the production of melatonin in our body?
Yes, it does. And this is what we call jet lag. When you move from one place to another where there are changes in the length of day or what the time of sunrise and sunset, this will actually shift your melatonin production.
Nta tandage gela trotical sambala ke tenga so namchu na ne chi jin rompo chi la chen bai bai na ani delaten de tenga so ge kar so da ti karsa melatonin chetin chi agi jiran chi ora tela shu chen tigre tig maris ta tigre swa ti chen bai bai na ani delaten de tenga so zu ko gang la ya jet lag sa chi or da jet lag nga so jira ti tinjo ge nge tap to chi jiro ta ti chung ge ores ta ti yung ge ba de kala na chi namchu phya ge chi ta chi or Ane karsa nimu shokpa tang ning konta gonda kati puguyo pa teta tang teta la tene tete karchi gare ses tang barang asu zupo nang ne melatonin chetin chia gi chi tisu chigorwa tela ya ane shuchin tang tela njura thegres.
But melatonin is the only data I showed you so far, but also our immune system has a day and a night cycle, and that also gets shifted with jet lag.
Tanda dela yang aso temba gi tang tu te ka system melatonin gi chetin ta temba gi tang tu chi kuna ten yes ro ani de gala shenda in bai na kare re system bala nga so nengo ko mala chi ro nengo ko mala te yang ko dus te yang ani chi nin chen tang tu ten de tan jod we ten de yo res ro de kala na ta data te ro nga so jet lag te chi sa cha chi la ya chi so mo por la nam tu pha te la ten de te ani chi melatonin gi chetin cha ta ani zu ko nengo ko mala chi ro dig ran shen te yang ko disogin juran do atang etu te la ten de ten ko la ya ani chi gi to ten do res.
And I can show you one example for the So B cells, as I show in this cartoon, are the cells that shoot out antibodies to protect us from viruses, bacteria, and other pathogens.
Tata de kase bit hapon siguro bit hapon de kala tata paradigm tang do de antibodies pang a chuga de dengo hapon de wa nengo hapon gozuk sigo de wa ta ti ka sigo system balaya ani shenda ni ka sigo ta nembu tinda ge thasun tinda no yong bai bai na ko ge ti grag che de lo yo.
And when we count the B cells, the number of B cells in the blood, what we see are these spikes at night.
Tanga so bit hapon nang ka se thadana no bit hapon ko khatang te du se tanga ja bai bai na ani ka sigo ta te ki ko phe gi tan de la ya chi thiri ga nang le ji nong bo yo sa chi la ti thong bo yo sa chi wa de ta ya phe wa de ka na gonda ni ko phe gi dus.
And what we found is that at night, B cells come into our bloodstream, but in the day, they move like traffic into our lymph nodes.
Toxina ne kara ha ko song se sta bala ya gonda im bai na nga chu bit ha bon de to nga chu thaklam la ro thak ka jalma la yong wa ta ani ko nyimu gi te se im bai na nga chu ge ta lymph nodes na mendu na tele pa ta traffic place number de kap se ni ko chi go res pandu go res.
And this is very important because in the lymph nodes is where B cells meet other cells to learn about new pathogens.
then they kitchen buchi chagore karchi kitchen buchagore system bala mendu nangla ya ani nga so bit hapon te to thapon jenda ta nyam ten de tu chi de te ani khogi karsa nembu saba tin do kanda imba ngush ba ji ngush ya ta ani te kola ya chi ta chi jonga the chi goro te chungu yores.
But in the blood, that is where B cells need to spit out the antibodies that can go after the pathogens.
The truck lamla ya ku karchi gore system bala ya nga so ge karsa gore ta then kan jonjo gane kan jonjo gane ani nembu chi goro ta ne chenyi gi chi goro bu chi goro te ta jinde tang go yores.
So what this means is in the daytime, B cells learn, and at night they get to work.
And they karela gore system bala ro ani nimu gutis ani bit hapong ge ani ku ge ta chi sobjan chi gi yo pas goro ta nembu karim ba muto cha la jonga chi gi yores ani gonda gutis imbana ani kusuge ta likala chi ku yores ta likachi yede kusuge never don't have it what ta chi gi yores.
So while we're sleeping, our immune system is doing very important duties.
Nga so ni nyebi kapsa ni kubi kapsa nga so nengo malage ne leka ke chembu chi du yores.
And this shows why the day and the night is very important for human health.
Tan de la tene de ro nga so ani nimu tan chemo so ta nin sen te nga so do me gi theng thela ya ka so chi ke chembu imba te teng yores.
Because not only is sleep important to maintain our health, but we also need nighttime in order to carry out important functions for living.
Nga so chi ge theng la ya ni ke chembu imba zan ma imba so ge zupo ge na ne nengo mala kle ka te ya go dria ta nga so chua de met de ro che te ni chemu gu tu chi ro chemu tu chi ya ha che ke chembu cha ge yores.
And this is why it is very concerning the more time people spend awake at night with artificial lights.
Tan din stambala ya ani kasugura ta mi chi mambu chi kitin sang ta nga so mi ji se chuma gi we la tene de tan ani ko ani sele de go ro ani stambala ya then de ta te nga so chi kasugura ta chi samtre chi go ani chi chag dus.
Just in the same way that artificial light influences the fireflies not being able to do their duties at night, it can also prevent our bodies from carrying out these functions.
Tanda nga so ge chi chuma gi we se go ra ta mi gi shi ji we te la tene de te nga so ge simbu mi cher chi do wa simbu mi cher ko su pan chu la yan jo chi ku yo ma ro da pa chu la tong ku yo ma ro te la kang ge che ko ra te nang sing ge ani nga su mi su gi chuma gi we te to la tene de te ani nga su gi zu po ta nga su ling kham ge yang ko ge de ka te ta ta chi ma thwa te la yang ko ge no chin tong ko chen te gi res.
Were there any other questions?
Good evening. I have two questions. The first question is related to melatonin. Okay. So my first question is, since melatonin is being secreted by pineal gland, what about the animal who doesn't have a pineal gland? Do they have a day-night shift? Yeah. Thank you.
So melatonin is very important as part of the clock for mammals, but melatonin is also produced by other cells in the body. So for organisms that don't have a pineal gland, they even plants produce melatonin. Sorry, you can translate that.
Tanda tropical system bala ya ani nga so ge zupu na ne melatonin chitin chi de la ya pineal membu segres wa o te ani meju ge wa ani samchin tin la kanado chi gres wa tanda de nga so ani ke chembu cha ge yores tanda melatonin de wa te chitin chi de la ya ani chi nga so nasu samchin ba ne pineal gland le chi ge yor wa te na sing ge yang ko melatonin chitin chi ne yang tanda te membu de chi bu mai ba yang shenda yang chi ge
So melatonin is a nighttime hormone for many mammals, but not for all animals.
Melatonin membu ti nga zu ge nesu samchen ba na ani ke chambu chagor sa gung ta ku chamu tang de bi menzi chi de wa ba na yang chi so cha samchen jen da chama la ke chambu ba de ma res.
We think of melatonin as being a signal of darkness for our body.
Ta nga su kan ro chi sam tang na de kre se na melatonin sa te nga su zu po la ya ani chi ga kar sa na khong na chamu gu ti tang de bi ge chi ga menzi do tang je do chi la kwa na de kre.
And for other organisms, they can have different signals of darkness, whether it be a sunflower or a fruit fly or a mouse.
Ta yang samchen shenda imba na ro nga su ge samchen ta ching shenda se go ro shenda la ya yang melatonin main be gi yang ko ze shenda tira yo na de kre pisha sha ba na ne nga su simbu mi che ta ani ti ro ka sa nyama me tok ta so ba na yang ko zo la ya chi na khon ta yang na chamu tang de be ze shenda tira yo des.
All organisms that are multicellular have these circadian day-night clocks.
Ta da nga su ta phu mang deng ge chi nge chang la ya ani ju nin cheng ge tang ro yo pe ge zu ko na ya tin jun ko ro de yo res.
But the clocks are not exactly the same across organisms.
Ta tin jun ko ro de sam jin chang ma na la ya ching song de na ma res.
Were there any other questions?
Chwa jamba yes.
Lo traya
Na so.
tanda te geogoten senche shawa singa tangi chi sia so o ti nga zu yulu no lo senche shawa ga ane shekiti zo sojane gangkha ti so ane ti tu den ya pha ne ane soja sa kuzo te ane nazu tong yong res o ta nga zu tanda sheju chemo no yo jenyo wa don de wale tenji shebe tu jono se ne chi sunya je yo o ti nga zu pense ta nyuwa nge da ma so na shi jamba shia te yo res ni lau yo ra ti za ane ti ga soja ya te yo re do ma ti so ti karsa so te lo tu yo re do yo ma re te chiri to che thalon to ni ane tu ya ba sing yo re do yo ma re es ro ta te shia yi
Ko ga soja ba ba ne mela na cha chung re la ba ka la ba.
o tombo soja de nasa tong yo ma re
Ore.
nasa tong yo re na ga tong yo re es o shi ya soja ba do nyon do lo tu shu yo re es nga zu julu no she yo re
Tu shi go res.
o tu shung yo te do nyon do lo tu shung yo re ina soja sa ko zo te soja ga ya jaga ya ba tha ko re te tu she ga ya ba da ha go ma re es shi sa gangkha ga te so la ta no shi tumo chadi ani tu de ya lo ne ani ko zo te ga a nga nge ma ti soja de chomba la ani te do nyon do lo tu shung de ya nyo be ga ani chamba shi ya te yo re es
Ore.
o ti nga zo ta ke chimbo yeme me she de nga zo no julu no lo pense ji ke ga do
Re re.
a pense de nyuwa to ne rate shu na ani ya pon du so ne te trawa to yi
That's all. Yeah, one interesting question. That animal, Jiwa, that wanna find like on the dictionary it says red mouse is like a big red mouse living in a high altitude probably and hibernate winter times. In one of the Buddhist texts is or the example was says like the mouse or the red bite you during the springtime. During that time, you feel you are bitten, but you don't feel other effect. That usually we said that we were affected. That some kind of poison was injected in our body, but we don't feel the effect during that time. But when it comes to like the winter time, that poison. The effect of the poison increases, and then we feel that the effect, and it I think it has like consequences. So what do you say about that? Is also like depend on the like the seasonal change of the animal that become more effective or like harmful during the winter time or something like that?
I would not be surprised if this animal did change its poisonous effects throughout the year, because animals tend to shift what they put their energy into depending on what time of year it is.
수수가 뉴바시 취시서 그러다 에너지 뉴바시 취시 때 관계라야 배셔 당게 유메사데 아니 남뜨긴 지와 당텐데 당 kusun 지와 당게 유레스.
And this is particularly the case when it comes to defenses, ways of defending yourself, like having big antlers or being aggressive, and could also be in terms of poison as well.
데이터 네탕 컨트리 가서 용거에서는 가서 그때 수수 송적 지역에 네탕스 그러다 수수 송적 지역에 네탕 tilestambalaya 아니 중국의 산삼랑 가서 라치로 템보임바나 라치로 링보요 바도당 되게 네탕 때 중국에 딘낭신게 아니 고 가서 그래 지금 고 가실라야 두 요인이 되려요와 어떻게 네탕 값은 중국에서.
So just like the big male deer and rams, they grow their horns at a particular time of year.
다 비차샤바는 가서 샤와 당 되게 르텔라야 아니 고속에 고속라야 라침부여라 라치침부여라 라치침부데 링부여 바데 아니 로기 뒤 미진지라야 아니 지용하지요와 어때요레스.
But if there's a way for you to sample the rat, maybe you can study if its poison changes depending on the season.
다 가서 좋아서 좋아라데 좋아되게 게티 엔코게 다 차다야나 두데단 데요주 콜라처럼게 지 그런게 되게 다 배도지 들도지 더 바이바이나 엔텔라테다 터시지나 되게 연코 연 남티 만도 값스 간도 두세티 콜라 터시지나 되레스.
Because maybe that poison is used for it to fight against other individuals of its species or to fight predators at certain times of year.
지지나 바이바이나 그거 두디지요와 두디 아니 지 남티 만다의 값은 고수 산이도 당 고출라야 지금 가서 그랬다 지금 탑고 진이게 삼전된다고 라 지금 아니 디탈이 송주지에도 비슷한 거요 같은 인식레스.
So these are great questions. We're going to make sure everybody gets a break before our next session. So with that, I will thank Micaela. And Micaela, if you're okay, I might provide your email address so that people can send you more questions.
Yes, definitely. I love these questions. They're great.
다 좋아야 부정성스이면 단단가서 소통지마 지어라 telaya percentage 지단게스 아니게 Micaela 투지시샤인스 네게데 누구에 바인바이나 아니 겐라게 email teachers 거치 줘요 바나 따로 치스도 아니 겔라 Micaela게 digdus and trobeyagodus and trotarochesons. Jela, another personage.
And before I leave, I will say that you live in the most perfect setting for studying the seasons because you have very extreme seasonal environment and also live very connected to the natural world.
That and then Banachetuga, Nathan Teleta by Bananga, around Namting Joatan David, position G, any Carsagore. Tilaya ani chi toxekia ge netamas on hachan ya puchila ni deshe ti nanshinge ani cheso chi ranshung khoi ta tes tanyo yuzan ani detala toxekia ge chi chachemas on pe ya pun zangsa chi ne shas cheso.
Thank you.
Thank you, Micaela.
Okay, bye.